Iranian terror threat. In 2010, a federal investigation discovered thousands of bonuses and student loan payments were given to California Guard soldiers who did not qualify or were approved erroneously. Now a hearing on the Pentagon efforts to recover those bonuses and the lead-up to Defense Secretary Carter suspending those efforts. This House Armed Services Committee hearing is an hour 45 minutes.
Go ahead and call the Military Personnel Subcommittee of the House Armed Services Committee to order. I want to welcome everyone to the subcommittee's hearing on the California National Guard bonus repayments issue. We're here today to hear from the California National Guard, the National Guard Bureau, and the Office of the Secretary of Defense on an issue that we must get right, in fairness to not only the California Guardsmen that this affected, but for all service members going forward. Compensation, whether it is a bonus for a service agreement or regular pay, is an obligation to our service members and their families that they should not have to worry about. I find it unacceptable that we would place the additional burden of years of concern about the legitimacy of a bonus payment or a student loan repayment on those who volunteer to serve. The Armed Services Committee has taken action in the 2017 National Defense Authorization Act to address this issue, and the subcommittee is taking every opportunity to thoroughly review and discuss the way forward so that we can prevent such a widespread problem or abuse in the future. Our purpose today is to gain an understanding from those involved on why this happened and what we can do to prevent it going forward. Before I introduce our panel, let me offer the Congresswoman Davis an opportunity to make any opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I would also like to welcome our witnesses today. I actually regret that we have to have this hearing to discuss a major pay issue that impacts 17,000 soldiers from one state, from my home state of California. Were it not for the LA Times article in October, Congress would not know the extent of this 12-year-old issue, nor would the issue have been elevated to the Department of Defense. Our understanding after this was first brought to our attention in 2010 was that a process was in place to adjudicate the issue, but 6 years on, we are still trying to fix it. Numerous investigations, audits, and briefings have informed us of how we got to this point. My focus today is to ensure that through the legislation just passed by the House last week as part of the 2017 NDAA, an update from the DoD, that we guarantee that those who should keep their bonuses do so, and that the systems and controls are in place to prevent an incident of this magnitude from happening again. While it is important that we perform oversight of the process moving forward, it's also critically important that we do not forget the service members and their families that have been deeply affected by this. Once these families have encountered financial hardships, we know it can be truly difficult to recover. Even if we return their bonus, we have already upended their lives by creating unnecessary emotional stress and financial instability. Our military families, as we all know, have a tough enough time without the added burden of having to repay service-related debts that they received in good faith. On another note, since this is his last hearing with us, I want to thank Dr. Heck for his leadership and his dedication to serving our troops, their families, and retirees over the past 2 years as chairman of the subcommittee. It has been a great privilege to work with him, and he will be missed.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Thank you. I now ask unanimous consent that non-subcommittee members be allowed to participate in today's hearing after all subcommittee members have had an opportunity to ask questions. Without objection, so ordered. We are joined today by two panels. The first from the National Guard, the second will be from the Office of Secretary of Defense and the Army. We'll give each witness the opportunity to make opening comments and each subcommittee member an opportunity to question the witnesses. I respectfully ask the witnesses to summarize to the greatest extent possible the high points of your written testimony in no more than 5 minutes. Your complete written statements will be entered into the hearing record. We are joined on panel 1 by Lieutenant General Timothy Kadavy, Director, Army National Guard Bureau, and Major General David Baldwin, Adjutant General of the California National Guard. General Kadavy, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman Heck, Ranking Member Davis, distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to discuss the readiness of Army National Guard personnel matters. On behalf of the Army National Guard, I would like to thank you for your support and commitment to our soldiers, their families, to our veterans, wounded warriors, and those who have made the ultimate sacrifice. For your Army National Guard is today mobilized with more than 11,000 soldiers, both abroad and here at home. Our soldiers are our nation's and our Army's greatest assets and should be treated that way. The subcommittee's interest in recruiting and retention incentives programs is understandable. In 2008, the California National Guard discovered inaccuracies in a number of incentive contracts awarded and launched an investigation in 2010. The investigation revealed that the California Guard's incentive program had been grossly mismanaged, and there were instances of fraud which were discovered. As a result, California took measures to ensure these individuals engaged in the perpetration of fraud were punished. In 2011, the California Incentive Task Force identified more than 17,000 California Army National Guard cases that were potentially linked to the unethical management of the incentives program between 2004 and 2011. In 2011, the California National Guard, with assistance from the National Guard Bureau, established a Soldier Incentive Assistance Center to assist any California National Guard member affected by the mismanagement of the incentives program. Every California National Guard soldier impacted received a formal written letter to inform them of this option. This center will continue to provide assistance to each affected soldier. As a result of the issues with the California incentives program, the Army National Guard took numerous steps to improve oversight within our incentives process. In 2010, the Chief of the National Guard Bureau, then General Craig McKinley, ordered a review of all Army National Guard recruiting and retention incentives programs across all states, territories, and the District of Columbia, which found no systemic fraud. In 2012, the Army National Guard completed the fielding of the Guard Incentive Management Systems, known as GIMS, to all states, territories, and again the District of Columbia, which now provides a centralized oversight program for bonus and incentive payments. In 2016, an external review of the Army by the Army Audit Agency of GIMS validated its effectiveness and found the system substantially improved the controls throughout eligibility, monitoring, and payment phases of the incentive process. State adjutant generals have provided annual statements of insurance since 2012, documenting internal controls processes to help prevent similar situations from occurring. Additionally, based upon reviews and assessments of the entire Army National Guard, fraud in the incentives program is not a nationwide problem. In November 2016, the United States Property and Fiscal Officers provided additional assurances while reviewing their state incentive programs that there are no issues outside of what we know to be normal. Currently, Mr. Peter Levine, performing duties as the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness, is chairing a cross-functional team with the National Guard Bureau, the United States Army, the Office of Secretary of Defense General Counsel, and the Defense Finance and Accounting Service, DFAS. This team is leading the effort to expeditiously resolve the cases involving the affected California Army National Guard members. I understand you will hear from Secretary Levine a little bit later this afternoon. Secretary of Defense Carter's guidance is to adjudicate all cases by July 1st, 2017. The National Guard continues to support the cross-functional team's process to ensure each soldier's case is fairly and equitably reviewed, with due process afforded to each and every soldier. In closing, I assure you that the National Guard has worked hard to implement appropriate, effective internal controls across the 50 states, the 3 territories, and the District of Columbia, and to prevent similar systemic fraud from occurring in the future. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, General. General Baldwin, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Ranking Member Davis and the members of the committee. I do, in fact, appreciate very much you taking up this important issue to be able to help our soldiers. As General Kadavy mentioned, in 2010, a whistleblower and a very astute auditor uncovered signs of potential fraud within our incentives program in the California National Guard. That resulted in a fairly broad investigation by the Federal Department of Justice that went through the course of 3 years. The governor relieved my predecessor in March of 2011 and recalled me from Afghanistan in April of that year in order to take charge of this organization and with a mandate of cleaning up this and some other challenges. I immediately have ordered a full investigation on our side into this matter to do a couple things. One is I wanted to see if there was any other cases of fraud that were out there that the federal government had not begun to investigate or picked up on. The second was to hold leaders accountable to find out why did this happen and what were the problems. We found that there was a complete lack of internal controls, so we instituted an internal control system in order to prevent these problems from happening again, and then we held the leaders accountable that failed to provide the proper oversight or create a command climate. In that, we punished within the California National Guard 61 people, including firing 4 general officers and 2 full colonels. The feds prosecuted 44 soldiers. Some of those prosecutions continue to go on, and several people were put in jail for the fraud that they had committed. But as General Kadavy mentioned, we also recognize that there were a lot of soldiers that got caught up in this that through no fault of their own had taken money from the federal government that they were not necessarily due or couldn't document why they did deserve that money. So we established the Soldier Assistance Task Force in 2011 in order to address those problems. Because of the fact that we had found a 91% error rate in the initial audits that we'd done, we were compelled to review every record. There were 17,000 soldiers and about 30,000 records. We were able to get through about 12,000 of the records. Of the 12,000, we found 4,000 soldiers that we were able to help keep their money to the tune of about $39 million because they had minor errors or problems in their contracts. And I'm very proud of the work that our task force did in order to help those soldiers keep the money that they in fact deserved. Of the remaining soldiers, there were 1,400, only 1,400 that we actually sent to recoupment. Those were soldiers that did not contact our task force for assistance, but also we determined had problems that were probably insurmountable and we couldn't support an appeal. We submitted another 1,200 soldiers that did contact us for appeal because we felt that they, even though there were problems in their contracts or maybe they may not have met the letter of their contract, we felt that they had served honorably and should be able to keep their money. Of those, 400 cases were adjudicated by either the National Guard Bureau or the Army Board for the Correction of Military Records. So 400 soldiers were able to win their appeals, and they were able to keep about $4 million between those 400 soldiers. Another 400 soldiers, even with our endorsement to help them keep their money, unfortunately lost their appeal and have not gotten their money back. They lost about $3.3 million amongst them. And then finally, there's 400 cases that are remaining. We're very encouraged today by the actions of the Congress and the legislation that has gone into the NDAA that we think goes a very long way to help address some of the problems that we face and the frustrations that we face in trying to help our soldiers get through this. We're also very encouraged by the actions that Secretary Carter and his team at OSD have taken in order to increase the bandwidth to be able to adjudicate cases quickly, fairly, and with standards that err on the side of honoring the soldiers in their service and helping them keep their money. And again, thank you very much for the opportunity to discuss this today.
Thank you, General Baldwin. So first, my first question is for General Kadavy. Concerning the key recommendations in the U.S. Army Audit Agency's follow-up review that was issued in May of this year, they noted that while NGB had made progress in implementing many of the control procedures outlined in their prior audit, that not all of the internal controls had been put into place. Can you please give us an update as to where NGB is in implementing the final recommended controls as put forward by the AAA?
Yes, Chairman. Thanks for the question.
Can I just ask you to pull that microphone directly, kind of like a rock star?
Right here? Okay. Okay, so there were 15 initial recommendations, of which the 2016 Army Auditing Agency follow-up reported that all 15 initial recommendations were being implemented, and then they recommended 4 new additional recommendations, of which one will be fully implemented by the end of this calendar year, by the end of the month of December, and the other 3 will be implemented by the end of this fiscal year. It's about writing software and updating systems to get after that. Particularly, it's related to officer bonuses and Army medical recruitment of experts to make sure we are tracking their contracts as we do with all others.
Right. And I would ask that you keep this subcommittee apprised of the progress in implementing those final 4 controls.
Yeah, we will, Chairman.
And while you noted in your testimony that there was no systemic fraud across the National Guard, has there been a review to look at whether or not there is widespread administrative errors? General Baldwin mentioned 91% error rate in what they reviewed in California. So while there may not be criminal fraud taking place, what about the administrative errors that might be more common across the National Guard enterprise?
So, Chairman, the Chief National Guard Bureau at the time, General Craig McKinley, asked us to do a survey of the other 53 states, territories, and District of Columbia, which began late 2010 and completed 2011. And we did identify some systemic problems, particularly related to lack of oversight, no separations of duties, inadequate training, outdated regulations, lack of manpower, and no overall tracking. But it said no widespread fraud. So we were already working on the GEMS system, and we believe GEMS accounted for most of that as shown through the Army Auditing Agency's follow-on recommendations and where we're at. And I can just give you a quick update. So on average, we do about 16,000 incentive contracts between 2011 and 2015, the latest year, 2016. We do about 1,200 recruitments on average for normal processes, which is about 7%. And you listen to some of the errors that were previously, and we have cut that down significantly. And the majority of those recruitments are for contractual issues when a soldier leaves before the end of their enlistment.
All right, thank you. General Baldwin, you listed some of the other numbers of individuals that were either disciplined or charged. Certainly we have only heard in the open media about the one NCO that seemed to bear the brunt. But can you again just list, for the record, the numbers of individuals other than that one NCO who was incarcerated, whether it be administrative reprimand or other disciplinary procedures?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I'll start with the cases that were prosecuted by either the feds or, in some cases, some district attorneys took up the fraud cases. That was 44 soldiers in total. Of those, 26 were prosecuted and found guilty and convicted. There was another 15 or so that are pending. The prosecution is still ongoing, and then the remainder, the cases were either dismissed, which is just a handful. I think it's only 4 that were dismissed or were acquitted. Then on our side, within the military, we have 2 options. We can do UCMJ action, which can include up to including courts-martial or administrative action. We initiated courts-martials on 7 personnel. It was 6 officers and 1 enlisted soldier. Those cases were dismissed by the military judge either for lack of jurisdiction or for lack of evidence. But we did go after 61 people, both on the receiving side, so people that we had evidence that had committed fraud but didn't rise to the threshold that one of the civilian prosecutors would apply the resources to take the case, so we took the case. And then there were also many cases of people that were in the chain of command that we couldn't prove had committed fraud, but as I had mentioned before, were lax in their oversight or established a poor command climate that we took action against. The most common action that we took against the senior leaders was to give a formal reprimand and fire them. And that again included 4 general officers and 2 colonels.
And of all the cases that you found scattered across the California Guard, did it seem like these were cases where it was up to one individual in a particular unit, or did there seem to be collusion? Like, was this a ring of individuals of all the folks that you mentioned that were actually doing this on purpose, or it just happened in units apart from some type of organized activity?
So it was statewide. It was across nearly every unit, and where there were cases of actual fraud, it was a bilateral arrangement between the master sergeant that ended up going to prison and the soldier that was receiving the money. And in those cases, either we or the federal government were able to prove and show evidence that there had been collusion where the incentive was offered and one or both parties admitted that they shouldn't be doing it, it violates the rules of the regulations, and they did it anyway.
And then just real quick, you mentioned there were 1,400 cases that had insurmountable problems. Could you give an example of what some of those problems might have been that prevented them from going forward on appeal?
Sure. Most common would be people that failed to serve the term of their contract egregiously, not falling short just by a few days or months, but by years. People that enlisted and never showed up to basic training. People that we had to throw out for methamphetamine use, incarcerations, those types of problems that are not compatible with military service.
And problems that would happen regardless of component, regardless of the California National Guard, things that are not isolated just to issues within the California Guard.
That's correct.
And then my last question, you said 400 of the cases you reviewed had lost their appeal, their appeal was not approved. Is there another step, or is that the end of the line for those individuals?
And I would defer that question to the second panel, but our request, which we think they're going to honor, is to go back and relook those cases because the Secretary is applying new standards, and we're hopeful that many of those people will make it through the process now, too.
Great. Thank you. Ms. Davis?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, I was going to ask about that as well in terms of those that you actually, in your words, endorsed but did not make it through the process. So we'll deal with that later. You know, one of the things that I wanted to just ask you about, because in your written testimony, you stated that Congress should establish a streamlined adjudication process to distinguish between those soldiers who, through no fault of their own, got involved in this, and then others who had failed to meet the condition. But the California Guard controlled those records. Is that correct? I mean, that you had control over those records?
Yes, ma'am. We would control the initial contract, but then it would go to the United States Property and Fiscal Accounting Officer, who is a representative of the National Guard Bureau in each state, who would actually formally make the payment. So the payment threshold to get approved was by a California Guardsman. The payment was made by the federal representative.
Okay. But the Incentive Assistance Center, could they make that judgment?
The authority to we at the state level do not have the authority to forgive any debts, and we don't have the authority for any of the waivers. They reside at the National Guard Bureau level, at General Kadavy's level now, and then further, if the cases are not able to get approved for a waiver at the National Guard Bureau level, the recourse is to go to the Army Board of Correctional and Military Records. My authority as the Adjutant General was very, very limited to help soldiers, and the 4,000 soldiers we did help were cases where they may have been just missing one signature or some initials on an otherwise good contract, and that was many of the errors.
Had that been different? Had you had more authorities? Because it kept feeling like everybody was passing the buck a little bit. And I'm just wondering what you see, what is ideal? Because as we look at some of the cases, I really was struck by the long-lasting impact this was having on our military families.
So if we had had the authority, we would have been able to act more quickly, because by the time we were making endorsement, instead it would have been an approval. But I think the way that the system's set up now is appropriate. It's appropriate for the federal government to withhold that authority from the states, because after all, it's the federal government's money. In addition, the other substantive change is the National Guard gym session system that General Kadavy and the chairman were just discussing earlier has been a very elegant solution to help correct a huge amount of administrative errors and neck it down to very small number of administrative errors. And when you have a small administrative error rate, it's a lot easier to root out fraud because you don't have to sift through tons and tons of documents. So I think the authorities are where they need to be. I'm very encouraged that OSD has increased the bandwidth to be able to adjudicate cases. And under General Kadavy's watch, before he got in, it used to take 9 months to get an exception to policy approved at his level. They now knock them out in 6 weeks. So that is hugely helpful.
Okay. General Kadavy, would you want to comment on that in terms of how you see the system working now? I mean, and I guess why we didn't change it before?
Well, I can just speak to the exceptions to policy, which I have authority for because they were written in Army National Guard policy. So I can do an exception to policy on skill, different infantryman to an armored crewman, and from one unit to another if they reenlisted for a specific bonus to a unit. I would say just the sheer magnitude of the overall problem, I think, caught us off guard. It took us a while to get back to apply the resources to adjudicate them faster. But you know, we follow the policy and directives, and right now the only thing I have the ability to is to do exceptions to policy, and as General Baldwin said, then it moves forward to ABCMR. I'd like to just, to talk about GEMS just a little bit more. It does. So it identifies through electronic searches in the database, which we didn't have prior to 2011. So it checks all those administrative data that's required to ensure that a soldier is eligible. So it does that, and it also tracks during the entire period. So when a soldier maybe changes an MOS, it flags and sends, a message to the administrative officer or NCO, who then takes action. If it was a directed change, then we do an exception to policy in a timely process. So I think many of the things that are impacting what happened in California between 2004 and 2011, and then looking at the current investigation and work that the California Task Force has been doing, I think today we don't see those types of issues anymore. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just follow up, and maybe someone else can ask about what other assistance we're providing. I know that there was an issue around credit ratings, and I think we were trying to fix that issue as well. But I'm concerned about how this impacted families, and if there's been sufficient outreach to know that there's help, there's support there, and we hope that they get it. Thank you.
I'll leave the majority of that comment to the next panel. I'll just say from my perspective, we have had overwhelming support, partnership from the Office of the Secretary of Defense, DOD, Army. Everybody wants to get this right for the soldiers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the generals for testifying today. And, this goes back a long ways. I was chair of the Veterans Committee, and Senator Denham at the time had the Senate committee, and it brings back the memories. And I think part of it when we did this was just the shock of what was happening. And of course, General Baldwin, I'm very, very happy with what you've done since you've taken over. So this is not an inquisition against you or anything else, and we've had a conversation, and where I'm coming from is going to be the same thing over and over again. And I'm not so worried about the officers so much as the troops. Everybody that's been in the military knows that everybody always has recruiters. And because you put your life in the hands of the recruiters. You trust them. You trust the Army. You trust the National Guard. You trust whatever service. And people, once they do that, it's like you're giving them your entire life. So my problems, which I'd like you to talk about, are on some of these cases where there's been troops that, through no fault of their own, are suffering the consequences. And maybe I'm wrong, but it sounds like we're nitpicking, particularly where some of these people don't have the economic means to repay these things or what. We've got to, it's our fault. Now, I use that word collectively on behalf of all officers that are in positions of authority. We betrayed the trust of the troops, and there is no excuse for that. So, obviously, I'm hearing how we're going to change this, and I still don't have a warm and fuzzy feeling about that's being done. I don't want it to be too bureaucratic. And after saying that, I do want to comment once again. Our Guard is so important, not just to California, but to all the operations that we're doing. And everybody on this committee knows the exercises in Europe and the commitments and the op plans and everything else. We have got to get this right. So once again, I'm going to ask a very broad question, and Well, in fact, I'm going to skip because I've been ranting and raving, and I do want to yield my time to Congressman Denham before it runs out. But eventually, if you could comment on the trust issue over and over again. Jeff, sorry I talked so long.
Thank you, Colonel Cook. And he and I, while we served in the state legislature together, chair of the Senate Veterans Committee, Assembly Veterans Committee on his behalf, we did work on this issue. I would say the difference that he and I may have is the difference in how we both, how we first got into the military. I was 17. I signed the contract that was put in front of me. In fact, at 17, you have to take it home to your mom to have her sign it as well. So for the military to take the position that the soldier is guilty and must prove a decade later that there was some fault of their own, I mean, we still continue to have conversations that you've got to still carry your yellow shot records around from decades before because it's not an automated system. So to presume that the soldier is guilty and therefore responsible for a decade-old contract that they signed in good faith and put their life on the line, to me is it is a big black mark on our Department of Defense's record. And I only have a short minute of time, but I'd ask you to just respond to both of our statements.
Well, Congressman, first I want to thank both you and Congressman Cook for your leadership role in addressing this and being very aggressive about it. And we really appreciate the support, and our soldiers, airmen, and families appreciate both of you very, very much. I would agree wholeheartedly, Congressman Cook, that we do have a problem that we're going to have to establish trust with our soldiers, with their families, and with potential recruits. I'm very encouraged by, as I mentioned before, by the actions that Congress have taken. I think that they go a long way to address some of the issues that you just brought up, Congressman Denham, and the steps, again, that OSD are taking in order to be able to show that soldiers, we're going to trust the soldiers up front, and if we have a problem with it, its burden is on us to prove that the soldier did something wrong, rather than the soldier having to prove from their innocence that they're innocent.
Thank you. Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Waltz.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'd like to take a moment, too, to thank you, General Heck's service, integrity, and effectiveness to this, not just to this committee, but to our veterans and our citizens, is something I am proud to have stood beside you as you did it. Oftentimes around here we talk about my good friend. I certainly mean it this time, and you've set an example of how we understand that our service is here for those that we're charged to look out for in our veterans. So I want to thank you, sir, for that. Thank you both for being here. And I was just discussing with the gentlelady from California. General Baldwin, you made a case of this, and I think we're trying to get at it, and I think the two gentlemen here obviously know this issue very well. But having been involved with this, both receiving bonuses and being part of a group that gives them, also being there when pay errors are made, when I would have to tell my soldiers, you knew you were divorced, you weren't going to get that BAQ, and you kept it anyway, so you're going to have to pay it back, because that's the way things work. I know this is a touchy subject, because when somebody gets paid, all the issues that the ranking member put out is this has huge impacts on family. It has huge impacts as it goes down the line. Just a couple questions. General Baldwin, you talked about this where people got bonuses. Did I hear you right? Even before they went to basic training, they got paid?
Yes, Congressman.
How did that happen? Because I'm thinking back to me, a $1,500 bonus. I completed basics and AIT. I got $750. 2 years later, I got $375. On the fourth year, I got $375. That kept me in. When did that change, or how does that authority differ?
I don't know when it changed, because when I joined, it was the same as you. You had to serve before you got all or some of your bonus.
Correct.
Somewhere around 2006, the National Guard Bureau changed its policy in order to provide a bigger incentive to get massive amounts of troops in.
Right.
And they would pay the bonuses up front. And that was a very poor business rule that doesn't exist anymore.
Okay. So a lot of these, I shouldn't say a lot, I'm trying to get the numbers on this. Many of them fell in that category.
That's correct.
But there was a section of these, as you said, that where someone knew they were getting a bad bonus, they colluded with the recruiter, and there was a kickback basically to take this bad bonus.
That's correct.
Now, could I ask, can you give me those numbers again, the error rate when you went back through and did your audit, the error rate in contracts in general?
So there were two. There was an audit done by the Army Audit Agency, and then an inquiry, which was a precursor, as you know, to an investigation that was initiated by my predecessor. First, with the Army Audit Agency that I didn't mention before, they found a 55% error rate in the sample that they looked at. I don't know how large that sample was. In the inquiry that was occurring in the month before I took command, they reviewed, I want to say it was 153 records, and in that case of those records, they found a 91% error rate. And that was enough that I felt compelled that we had to continue to look at every single record.
What accounted for that? And, you know, and having done these before and the detail that went into them, I'm still from the old age of carbon paper, and everything had to be exact or it was no good, and they threw them back out. How could you have a 91%? I mean, were these small errors, large errors, misinterpretations of the regulations?
It was all of that, but the root cause problem was lack of oversight of control and lack of resources. So they had one person doing incentive managements, and the number of incentives had grown very rapidly from just a handful of incentives that would offer for critical MOSs or bonuses to a very, very broad palette of incentives that ranged everything from medical professionals to people that were going to join the band and everything in between. And at the time, they had one person managing these incentives. She was overwhelmed. She was under tremendous pressure to help get the numbers, to disperse the money, and she had no good oversight, only people pressing on her to get money out, no one checking to see if she needed help, no one checking to see if she was doing things correctly.
Which is a recipe for disaster. General Kadavy, if I can move to you on this, that when you did a system-wide NGB audit of this, I'm reading this correctly, you only found irregular bonus activity to a total of about $58,000. Is that correct? Am I reading this right?
Congressman, so when we did the 53 other states, territories, and District of Columbia, we did a sampling of about 9,600 records. We found 689 that had errors across the other 54, for a percent of about 14, and that was actually 2.4 million, where, you know, General Baldwin mentioned the Army Auditing Agency. They did a sampling of 159 in California. They discovered 97 errors.
See, this one, and if my time is going to come up, but somewhere I'd like to come back to this. Most often when you have an issue like this, I find it's system-wide, whether it's a VA or DOD. This is very odd. Does that strike, and we'll come back to it. I know the fraud made a piece of that, but that's a very interesting statistic. So I'll get more when we come back on my time, but thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I have just a brief question. I'm going to yield some time. I, too, would like to thank Congressman Heck for his leadership. He's been invaluable. My only question is on the GIM system, because we are talking about trust. And when I went down and signed when I was 18 years old, I don't know that I was a whole lot smarter than Congressman Denham when he was 17, probably a lot smarter. But, you know, it is kind of a contract that you're going down there and you're trusting and you're believing that what the recruiter is saying is the truth. And so I think that it is a trust issue that we're trying to build back. But General Kadavy, you talked about the GIM system a little bit, and I'm going to give you just a little bit of time to tell us how that's going to build back some of the trust that we can have in how the recruiting process is going to go, and how we can be assured that some of the, all of these problems, if not, are going to be caught before they become a problem.
So Congressman, I think GIMS puts trust back into the system. I think what we're really talking about is trust between leadership and soldiers, and that's earned, and a system isn't going to fix that. And so we do a tremendous amount of training out at our Professional Education Center for all recruiters. We are not getting our recruiters there in a timely fashion. We are working on that. We've provided additional guidance to ensure they are getting the training. And then we've also implemented a program called POSTA, and I'll have to get you the exact name of it. So the adjutant generals review each and every recruiter to make sure they're ethically, morally the right folks to be talking to young men and women that potentially could join our Army National Guard. And when there's issues that they think the soldier's still good, it comes up to me, and I read each and every one of the poster requests for any waivers. And I think in the time that I've been the director, I've approved one, because you're absolutely right. Our very best, most trusted professionals must be the ones that are recruiting our young Americans.
Very good. And, Mr. Chair, I'm going to yield the balance of my time to Congressman Denham.
The gentleman will suspend. I was informed by staff that subcommittee members cannot give their time to a non-subcommittee member. They'd have to wait until after all subcommittee members had an opportunity to ask their questions.
I'm going to keep my time. General Kadavy, on the same kind of vein, I know that Congresswoman Davis was talking us down this road of when the folks have been given a bonus and then they've had to repay the bonus, but under the appeal, they were awarded the bonus. They should have gotten the bonus. They should have kept the bonus. But some of these folks have now paid back a bonus, and maybe their credit approval has been hurt. Some of the things that, because of paying back that bonus, it put them in some hardship. I mean, that's going to be part of the trust issue, too, of how we can make those soldiers whole moving forward. Is that, obviously, that's going to be a big part of what you do, but is that also part of how we can help in this issue?
Congressman, I can tell you that it's very important to the cross-functional team that Mr. Levine is leading. It's one of the key issues that we are looking at. At this point in time, what I'm hearing is we think we have all the authorities and the abilities to make a soldier whole, particularly in the instances that you were talking about. But I would say the subject matter experts on this particular question are probably in the panel, too.
Okay. And very good, Mr. Chair, I'm going to yield back.
Ms. Spear? Ms. Gavry? All right, then we'll go to Mr. Kaufman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, so let me understand this right. So you've got a recruit coming in and takes a certain MOS for a certain length of time under the bonus, in order to get a bonus. That individual is placed for whatever reason in a different MOS. Is that or occupies a different position in a unit that is different from that MOS? Is that individual required to pay back the bonus?
It depends. So we give bonuses for 3 reasons: for a skill, a grade, or a unit. If that is a critical MOS and the soldier elects to change on their own, in general, yes, that is a recoupment. If we direct the change, or for instance, we just had a number of units that changed their structure from military police to others, that was directed by us. There's no recoupment. And then a soldier, of course, can always provide an exception to policy request, and many have, that indicates if there were some issues, I can't go that far to drill, it's too far of a drive. We take all those considerations and then a decision's made. But it doesn't necessarily mean that. But in the gym system, there's a flag that goes up, which means it needs to be adjudicated one way or another with an exception to policy or a termination of a contract.
Okay. What is the status of these recruiting bonuses to pay other soldiers? That practice has stopped, right?
Yes.
Okay,
that's been stopped for quite some years.
So what is the status of the bonus structure now for recruiting people, say, first-term enlistees?
I guess I don't understand the question.
So I assume there's still a bonus structure for first-term enlistees?
Right. There are enlistment bonuses for certain units, certain skill sets, and then retentions bonuses for certain grades where we don't have enough, for instance, maybe staff sergeants and et cetera.
And how dynamic is that process? Because I think that it seems like, I know in 2005 it was very tough to fill the ranks of the military across the board, and obviously it's much easier today than it was back then.
Right. So, Congressman, it's very dynamic today. We're taking a look at it. I think it's almost too dynamic that it gets to be a bit confusing. And I just talked to a few of the adjutant generals that are on a General Officer Advisory Committee, and we are likely going to go to talk to the states, and they provide us where their holes are at the beginning of the year and mid-year. We will adjust it if need be, so that it stabilizes and doesn't change the skill sets and the grades and the units on a continual basis that maybe is confusing and causes some of these issues. So we're going to try.
But those enlisted soldiers that sign up for an MOS specialty and they get moved, or they, how does that? I guess they elect to move, but I just want to make sure they're fully cognizant of.
What I'm talking about is initial enlistment. When you sign, we're going to limit how often we change which skill sets. So we might have a different one every month, and sometimes that gets confusing to recruiters. Or a recruit walks in thinking they're going to get a bonus, but they wait to make a decision a couple months later, and that skill is no longer there as far as recruiting. What you're talking about is once a soldier signs the contract, JIMS verifies that, and you know, as long as they live up to that contract, there are no issues. If something changes, JIMS flags it, and we adjudicate it either through an exception to policy, ABCMR, or if the soldier, for instance, doesn't complete a set of training and decides to no longer serve out their enlistment period in the Army National Guard, then by statute and policy, we must recoup for any unexecuted portion of that contract.
But when you said if an enlisted soldier elects, first-term enlistment, elects to change an MOS, then they would be responsible for recouping. But if it was a critical MOS, how would the command structure allow them to elect to change their MOS?
Well, I can't speak to every case, but in general, you know what you signed up for. So in most cases, in my observation, is it's more related to changes in force structure and force design updates that the Army provides us. So you're in an MOS, in a unit, in a location today, and that changes. We do not collect from that particular soldier. And I don't see that as an issue that is related as much as it was to the past.
Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Garamendi.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the privilege of sitting with your committee and now asking a question. I appreciate the information that's been elicited thus far in the testimony. We now have an NDAA that has a new law, a new section that will eventually become law, and it may affect, certainly meant to affect, those men and women that took a bonus in good faith, carried out their responsibilities, even though it may not have been to the strict MOS or other criteria, and have faced a clawback of their bonus. I agree with, I think, every member in this panel that that's unconscionable, that could happen, or did happen. But my real question is going forward. General Baldwin, you gave a bunch of statistics and numbers at the outset. I'd like you to quickly review those in the context of how does the new, hopefully soon to be new law in the NDAA affect those men and women that are under review as a result of the bonus question that has arisen in California. If you could run through that quickly. And I also understand there are certain criteria that are in the soon-to-be law, as well as criteria that that the Army may use to eliminate from the clawback or potential clawback. Could we go through that, please?
Sure. So I think an important step is that's in the law is as OSD is putting together their team, and they'll discuss it in the next panel, that's going to be able to more rapidly adjudicate the cases and review soldiers to find the ones that, the many, many thousands perhaps of the ones that deserve to keep their money. one of the main things that it does is that it relieves the notion that for that targeted group of individuals that we have to have a presumption of guilt in order to review their case. They're going to review every case that they take before them. So that's very, very encouraging. The other thing the law does that I think is very, very helpful is that, and as I understand it, this will impact not only the soldiers that are in this population that we're addressing here, but National Guardsmen, ostensibly both in the Army and the Air National Guard from time forward, that if DFAS establishes a debt for a National Guard soldier or airman prior to this current NDAA, the National Guardsman could not go to DFAS to ask for a sum total financial relief for financial hardship. They could do it in the case if they had lost or damaged government property, but in the case when they had been overpaid or paid a bonus that they weren't due, they couldn't get relief if they were suffering financial hardship. Title 10 active duty personnel could, Title 32 couldn't. The current NDA corrects that, and we're very, very happy to see that in there.
I understand that there were other criteria that would eliminate from the clawback certain men, guardsmen, guardspeople. Is that the case? Is it only this issue of financial hardship, or does it have to do with rank, position?
If I could take this one, Dave.
Oh, sure.
So, Congressman, as a member of the cross-functional team being led by OSD, we are still reviewing in the next panel. Mr. Levine can tell you exactly where we're at on this. But we are building criteria, and I think based on the Secretary of Defense's guidance and what's in the NDAA, the intent is to only find those that were ineligible for a bonus and should have or did know they were ineligible. The intent is not to recoup from soldiers that did not understand what was going on. It's only to get after those that were ineligible and accepted a bonus knowing they were ineligible.
Will that criteria significantly reduce the number of guards people that are affected?
So I've been asked if you could refer that question to the next panel.
I will do so. Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you, and I want to thank this panel for writing into the NDAA the language that will significantly solve most of the problem, perhaps not all of it. And I would ask that in the future this panel continue to observe and watch as this plays out. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me add my words of praise to you for your service to our country and to this Congress, and thank you as well for bringing this issue to the forefront today. Let me start with you, General Baldwin. You met with me yesterday, and I appreciated that. You took over in 2011, correct?
Yes, ma'am. April of 2011.
And you took over in part because the governor saw this as a problem and wanted to relieve the general before you and put you in that position, correct?
That's correct.
All right. So from 2011 until 2016, the only time this was ranked as an issue, and it was ranked number 6, was in 2014 to the Armed Services Committee, and there was no impetus to take this seriously enough to fast-track it. And it was only until the Los Angeles Times did a story that this issue got some traction. So my question to you is, while you are not responsible for what happened before your watch, you are responsible for what happened after you took over, and why didn't you elevate this to a high enough level in 2012, and 2013, and 2015, and again in this year?
So for the first 2 years you mentioned, 2012 and 2013, we weren't aware of the amount of time that it was going to take to get through the adjudication process. We first started pushing cases forward after doing the review in late 2012. And since it was taking 2 years for cases to run their course, it wasn't until the end of 2013 to 2014 that we realized the scope of the problem we had based on the amount of time it was taking to get relief for soldiers. That's why in 2014, we first brought...
Okay, I'm going to shortcut this a little bit because I have limited amount of time. I just want to make the point that while you have made it a priority on a list, you didn't make it a priority to the committee, and so it wasn't dealt with as it should have been. Now, you had mentioned to me that some of the largest bonuses went to physicians, the $40,000, the $50,000, the $60,000 bonuses. And in those cases, they committed to 6 years, served in some cases less than 2 years, got the bonus up front. Now, that decision to offer that bonus up front before you had committed the 6 years seems like a no-brainer. Why would anyone do that in an administrative role when the likelihood of someone skipping is pretty high?
Yeah, so that is a great example because those cases, because of the dollar amount, were amongst the most egregious. The way that the program for benefits or for incentives for medical professionals worked at the time is they could actually get up to an $80,000 bonus, and it was paid out in tranches. So every couple of years, as they served more time, they would get paid part of the bonus. And that was in accordance with the regulation. What happened is the incentive manager, though, would just push the button to pay the whole lump sum in 1 year or maybe after 2 years. So if they had made a 6-year commitment, that medical professional served 2 years, got their $60,000, $80,000, whatever it was, and then...
Okay, so I want to go on record that those medical professionals that got those bonuses with a commitment to serve 6 years and only serve 2, that we should claw back every single dime. Now, for those, you also told me that you are under the impression that for non-commissioned personnel that are who were enlisted, that for the most part, especially if they were over 10 years in length, that is going to be waived, and that requirement for enlisted will not be clawed back. Is that true?
So that, I think that's one of the business rules that they're going to discuss in the next panel, that for certain ranks and for certain time and service, for more junior people, they're going to apply some rules that are more forgiving for people that may have been more senior or perhaps worked in recruiting that should have known the rules.
Okay, I've always had a problem with this should have known, because if you received it, you didn't know that you weren't supposed to receive it, but you should have known, and it's 10 years past. That is, I think, an expectation that we should not require those individuals to pay it back, particularly if they committed to a contract and served for the requisite period of time. And with that, I yield back.
Mr. Aguilar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't serve on this panel. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to ask a few questions, and thank you for, it's been a pleasure to serve with you on the full committee as well. General Baldwin, can you explain, again, maybe this is getting a little too deep into the should have and did know that you mentioned, can you explain the process that was gone through to determine whether the incentive pay or the student loan needed to be recouped? And then immediately thereafter, once that decision was made and the notification was given, what were the next few steps along the process?
Sure. So all cases that where we did not find fraud or suspect fraud. So for the preponderance of the soldiers, what we would do is overlay the paperwork that they had that showed here's their contract, here's what the regulation says in order for them to receive that certain benefit, in order for them to establish eligibility, what other documents are required, and whether or not they had all that paperwork. By the rules that were in place on time, at that time, if someone was missing one of those elements, it voided the contract. And that forced us to then send them to the National Guard Bureau for an exception to policy, which we, again, sent with the ones that we did send, where we're working with the soldiers, we sent with endorsements recommending approval. If they did not get approved, if their exception to policy got approved by the National Guard Bureau, that was then within General Kadavy's predecessor to allow them to keep the money, and then we were done. If the National Guard Bureau did not or could not approve the exception to policy, it did give us the ability to help the soldier go to the Army Board of Correctional Military Records, where the case would then go and get reviewed by an administrative law judge that would then make a determination of whether or not they would approve it. We had about a 50% success rate there. I'll give you one concrete example of a fairly common problem that we found was for soldiers that were first-term enlistees. As in the case of Congressman Denham, where you can join the National Guard or the military when you're only 17 years old, a lot of these soldiers hadn't graduated from high school when they enlisted. For the National Guard, you could do that. You can join the National Guard before you graduate from high school. However, in order to be eligible for the bonus, you have to produce a high school diploma. And in many cases, the soldiers served and served well, but we just didn't have a high school diploma in their records. And then in that case, we had to take action. And those are cases that were fairly easy for us to go back to either exception to policy or up to the ABCMR to get relief.
And what kind of time period were they given in order to correct the document side, the deficiency that you saw, whether it was a high school diploma or whether it was any other document?
So the only soldiers that we sent to recoupment were those soldiers that did not contact us. So if a soldier contacted us, we worked with them and have continued to work with them, and to my knowledge have not sent any soldier to recruitment for any benefit that we could assist them on.
General Kadavy, do you want to talk a little bit about that from a process perspective? Those that came through, within that flow chart, those that came through that your office and your predecessor reviewed, what did that look like from the documentation standpoint? That's what I'm concerned about, or those folks that were dinged because of the lack of documentation, but met the criteria for the bonus.
Yeah, so I believe, I can't always speak for my predecessor, but our guidance, our intent is to work as hard as we can for an exception to policy for each and every soldier. And quite honestly, if they had served the term and met the agreements, an exception to policy was almost always provided.
Okay, I appreciate it. I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think you touched on this. I'm directing my question to General Kadavy. Did I pronounce your name correctly? Kadavy? Okay. Was one way or the other. I picked the wrong way. But you discussed in your opening comments that you have not seen this concern widespread across the country. It's limited to California. I'm from Florida, and reached out to our National Guard as soon as I heard of this to just see where they thought that they were with any challenges with bonus recoupment with our National Guard, and we have about 12,000 in Florida. Just want to confirm that you don't see any of these concerns in Florida that have come to the attention of those here regarding California.
Well, specifically related to the fraud, we have given no guidance to any other state, district, or the territory of, or District of Columbia or any of the territories to do any audits or any inspections. As I said, through GEMS, we always have ongoing recoupments for generally those that don't meet the term of their enlistment. So specifically, I can't talk specifically to Florida and what is going on in Florida, but we have not directed any type of work, and we've not discovered any type of systemic problem related to fraud that we are aware of.
Well, that answer kind of concerns me, because I thought in the beginning that you stated that there weren't concerns across the country, that this was limited to California. Could this be something that the wonderful men and women that serve in our National Guard in Florida have to be worried about? Because I certainly, as I think the only representative for Florida here, want to give them some assurances that that will not be the case.
Well,
Congresswoman, we've conducted audits. The national performing the duties of Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness, Peter Levine. I apologize. I'm on the next panel.
No worries. Thank you for stepping in.
I apologize for jumping on this. But because we've done some reviews and we've identified 0 cases in Florida, I thought it would be helpful for me just to mention that.
Right.
0 cases is very good. Thank you. Thank you very much. So I will take from your testimony that the men and women that serve in our National Guard in Florida do not have to be worried about this same concern. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, gentlemen, for being here today. I'm troubled. Between 2006 and 2008, National Guard senior non-commissioned officers improperly provided student loan repayments and bonuses to numerous California National Guard members. And one person, Master Sergeant, female, Tony, can't come up. Tony Jaffe was the only person to be criminally sanctioned. But dozens of personnel, including senior leaders and general officers, were punished by the California National Guard for this illegal activity. Is that correct?
That's correct, Congressman, but an additional 43 soldiers were charged and prosecuted by either the federal government or district attorneys for fraud also. Master Sergeant Jaffe is not the only person that served jail time. She served far more time in prison than anyone else that did jail time, but there were other officers and some non-commissioned officers that were given sentences that included some jail time.
All right, thank you. What was the highest ranking official to be found to have engaged in this misconduct?
So on the receiving side, or the people that we actually had evidence that committed fraud or colluded to commit fraud, I believe it was a captain was the highest ranking individual that received money. Higher ranking officers weren't eligible for the bonuses. Yeah,
actually, I'm getting at those who were responsible for initiating the payments, not those who received them.
So the only person held responsible for initiating the payments was Master Sergeant Jaffe. I held many people responsible, though, for their failure to provide proper oversight or leadership. That included 3 two-star generals, 1 two-star general, and 1 colonel that was in the California National Guard, and then the National Guard Bureau fired a colonel that was working for the National Guard Bureau.
Why were not the others charged criminally? It appears that the Master Sergeant may have been made the fall guy from a criminal standpoint.
You would have to ask the U.S. Attorney that question, Congressman, because they did those prosecutions and they actually had seized all of the evidence related to that case. So if there was any evidence that senior leaders had actually colluded, I haven't seen that evidence. If I was presented with evidence like that, I would take the appropriate action.
What was it about the Sergeant Major's case that made it actionable from a criminal standpoint, whereas others were not?
I don't know the details of the case. As I understand it, they had physical evidence, whether it was copies of contracts or it was emails or some forms of conversations where they could prove that she had actually colluded with officers and enlisted people to do this.
Are the criminal cases now, or is criminal prosecution, has the criminal investigation ended, or is it still ongoing?
I don't know. Again, you'd have to ask the U.S. Attorney that question.
Did your office make any recommendations as to who or who would not be prosecuted? Who should or should not be prosecuted?
They did not have that conversation with us, and again, they seized all the evidence. So any recommendation that we did have would have to be based on the evidence. They seized all that evidence before I came back from Afghanistan.
Major General Baldwin, in your testimony, you stated that that service members, you stated service members that should be required to repay their bonuses should be made to do so. Can you describe in more detail in what cases would service members actually have to repay the bonuses and that they've received, especially since in most cases it seems they got the bonuses through no fault of their own?
It would be in those cases where the service member egregiously violated the contract for which they said that they would serve. For example, they signed up and then never went to basic training, or they signed up for 6 years and only performed 2 years of guard duty and then either went AWOL or left the guard for some reason.
Do you have the numbers?
The gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you.
Mr. Denham.
Mr. Chair, General Baldwin, annually you put together a list of priorities through your office. That's something you do every year?
That's correct.
When do you start working on that?
Generally, we start working in the late fall, early spring, in order that we can present those legislative priorities to the Congress around the March timeframe, so they're ahead of the mark.
And I've got here in front of me your list from FY15. So you would have started this in spring of 14, addressed Congress later that year?
We would have presented it in the spring of 14 and started working on it in the fall of 13.
So you got your FY15, I just want to be clear, FY15 NDAA priorities, you present that to Congress when?
Around March of, it would have been around March of 2014.
2014. So you start working on that in 2013.
That's correct.
And this year in particular, FY15, you list as priority number 6, your final priority, service member debt relief equity. That is the issue that we've now, I introduced legislation on this year. We've now included in the NDA this year. But I was surprised to see that in FY 2016, your list of priorities, it wasn't in here. You've got 6 priorities, and this debt repayment was not one of them. Why did it fall off of the list?
So it fell off because in 2014, the item had been scored by the CBO, and we weren't successful in getting it through because of the cost that was involved. It was a tough sequestration year. In 2015...
but we're still under a tough sequestration year.
I understand that, Congressman. I regret not including it in the 2016 year, and I'm very encouraged that the committee, again, with your leadership assisting, is helping to get this legislation passed.
Well, why wasn't it included in 2017? You would have started working on that 2 years ago, correct?
That's correct. Again, we felt that we had asked, we were not able to take that ball across the goal line, so we directed our time and energy towards trying to help the soldiers that we could influence. In retrospect and hindsight, you're right. I should have continued to make this a priority.
Is that your list of priorities? Is that at your sole discretion, or does the governor weigh in on that?
Ultimately, it's my list, and I take responsibility for the list.
In the language that we've now included in the NDAA, we have resolution to this. My concern has been, as a member of Congress, I don't get a list from the DOD on who who they're going after for this debt forgiveness. I don't get any idea of who is having to repay this, who's been harassed, until they call my office. So somebody who has now repaid their debt, how do they go about filing to resolve this issue going forward? What is the process? How does the process work to make somebody financially whole that has now taken a second out on their house and repaid a debt that they didn't know?
I think the second panel will be able to address much of that. We have still have our soldier assistance team in place. There is a 1-800 number that we have posted on our webpage that people can call that have been in this, so that we can get to work. That if they have suffered from this, or they are on the list of people that potentially may have had a problem with it, that we can then refer them to the lawyers and the people, whether it's in California or at the Army or at OSD, to get help.
And what if there is an individual that is still serving, that either in the Guard or Reserves, that is being asked to repay a debt, but in their chain of command, they're asking them not to go to a legislator or a member of Congress. What would your opinion of that be?
Well, that violates the policies that are in place that are both OSD policies and policies that I have within the military department. No one can interfere with an individual's right or ability to make a protected communication between themselves and their elected officials.
Thank you. Well, I'll look forward to following up with you on that as we resolve this issue for a constituent. One final question, and you and I had a discussion about this earlier. I have a big concern with when somebody takes a government document, a private email, and puts that out for the press to see. My concern in this case wasn't about the legislation itself. My concern is with the issue with recruitment and retention that it is now had on the Department of Defense and even the VA in this case. I'd like to follow up with you on this release of emails from your subordinates to get a further clarification on why they felt a need to go outside of their chain of command on this issue as well.
I look forward to that, Congressman, and if there's anyone in the California Military Department that violated any laws, rules, policies, or regulations, we'll take the appropriate action.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank both of you for taking the time to be here today to review this important issue, and at this time we will switch out the panels and we'll hear from representatives from the Office of Secretary of Defense. I'd now like to introduce our second panel. We have Mr. Peter Levin performing the duties of the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness from the Department of Defense, Ms. Alyssa Starzik, General Counsel for the Department of the Army, and Ms. Teresa McKay, Director of the Defense Finance and Accounting Service. Mr. Secretary, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Davis, first of all, thank you for holding this hearing, and I really appreciate the discussion that I heard with the first panel. It shows some serious engagement on what is really an important issue. I'd also like to join your colleagues, Mr. Chairman, in thanking you for your service. You've been very good to the Department of Defense. Your focus on these personnel and readiness issues has been really important to us and really helpful to us, so thank you. I'd also like to, if I may, thank Chairman Thornberry for being here and for continuing to listen on occasion to my good friend, Mr. Simmons, who I see also in the back row there. You have my written statement, and I won't read any of it. There are a few points that I'd like to focus on, some of which have already been discussed, but I think deserve some attention. First of all, recoupment is an ordinary fact of life in the military. Our pay systems aren't as perfect as we'd like them to be, and we'd run into any number of issues from the person we heard about earlier who might be divorced and still getting BAH as if they were married, to somebody who's got the wrong paycheck or fails to pay a bill, fails to pay a travel bill. We're recouping against as many as 100,000 soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines at any given time, and civilians as well. The California Army National Guard cases are particularly the ones that have been in the press, that have been reported in the press, are a particularly egregious set of cases, but I wouldn't want members of the committee to think that this is the nature of recoupment and that we always have this problem with recoupment. There are a number of reasons why these cases are the cases we've read about in the press are particularly troublesome. One is that many of them are based just on a technical deficiency. We've heard about wrong MOS, cases where the soldier may have been misled as to whether that wrong MOS mattered, whether they needed to have a high school diploma, technical absence of paperwork, which seems like a pretty minor reason for recoupment, particularly in cases like this where we have service members who made a commitment on the basis of a bonus, and then served out that commitment. So when we come in later after somebody has fulfilled their commitment and then question on a technical ground why they received a bonus that in the first place, that's a particular hardship. What I hope you'll understand is that that's not all the cases that we're dealing with, even with the California National Guard. We heard about some of the medical professionals who may have received bonuses and then not served out their commitment. We have a significant number of other cases in this pile of recoupment cases where we had service members make a commitment and receive a bonus on the basis of commitment and then not fulfill that commitment. So as a matter of basic fairness to those who did serve out their commitment, we need to take a very close look at those cases. And those would tend to be cases in which we would expect to uphold, in most cases, uphold the recoupment if the service member didn't fulfill the terms, the commitment, the terms of the contract. Second point I'd like to focus on briefly is just how the process of recoupment sets up. We read in the press that the Pentagon ordered recoupment. The Pentagon means a lot of different things to a lot of people. It could mean the Secretary or OSD or people in Washington, or it could mean the entire Department of Defense. The way we work on these kinds of issues, and it's not just limited to recoupment issues or pay issues, we have an auditor come in and look at an issue. An auditor identifies a problem, and they have standards to which they work to identify those problems, but auditors do not make decisions for the Department of Defense. Auditors do not determine that we're going to recoup or not going to recoup. Auditors make recommendations. So if you're in a contract matter, an auditor would make a recommendation to a contracting officer, and the contracting officer would make a decision. In this case, the auditor would make a recommendation to the property and financial accounting official, who is technically an employee of the National Guard Bureau, but is appointed by the California National Guard, and is a California National Guard member appointed by the California National Guard, but then serves as a federal role because they're activated when they're appointed to that position. As we look at the way these cases set up, we had the Army Audit Agency do an audit and make a recommendation with regard to a limited number of cases and found an error rate, I think we heard, of 50-something%. California National Guard looked at that. When we look at these things, we have discretion, we have enforcement discretion. We don't have to say, yes, the auditor said to do this, we're going to do every one of these things. Before we get to the point of establishing a debt, we can determine whether it's in our interest to establish a debt or not. So as we've looked at other states where we had smaller numbers and lower error rates, we see that some of the other states with the National Guard, where you had 8 cases, only 2 of them were sent for recoupment, or 10 cases, only 3 were sent for recoupment, or 40 cases, only 5 were sent for recoupment. Some states sent all the cases for recoupment. They make those judgments. What California did, and it was within their discretion, and given that they said that they did another review and found a 91% error rate, I can't say it's wrong for them to do this, but they not only referred all the cases that they had for recoupment, but they also said, we're going to do a 100% review of everybody else. So we're not only going to refer for recoupment those cases that were in our sample, we're going to go to the rest of the universe, which brought in about 17,000 more individuals. I think that what the California National Guard discovered over a period of years after they did that was that they didn't have the bandwidth to deal with those cases. And so they dealt with some of those cases and put some of them into recoupment. Some of them should have put into recoupment, some of them maybe not, but they left thousands of other cases hanging out there with the threat of recoupment over them, which I think adds to the unfairness of this process. Now, I have to say, we have oversight over the California National Guard. Army has oversight. The National Guard Bureau has oversight. We were not aware of this until we read it in the newspaper, and that's on us. We missed this. But when we became aware of this, the Secretary specifically directed me, go in and address this, do this fairly, do this expeditiously, get it done by next summer. So we're going through a process where we're going to be looking at these cases to figure out which ones should be subject to recoupment, and we're going to do it as expeditiously as possible. As your legislation requires, we're going to favor the soldier wherever possible, but we're going to account for the differences in different types of cases. Now, we have 2 basic categories of cases that we have to deal with. One is those cases that were already determined to have a debt and sent to DFAS for recoupment. DFAS is just sort of the receiver here. They get the cases. They implement it. Somebody else tells them that they're supposed to recoup. So we have about 1,400 cases in that category. Then we have a second category of cases that were essentially put under suspicion or threat of recoupment, about 16,000 more cases in that category. For those cases that are in recoupment, we have the question of, are we going to dismiss the case? Are we going to forgive the debt? Are we going to repay the soldier if we decide it was improper? We put those through a screening process. We've already had the Army Audit Agency look at all 1,400 cases through a preliminary screen. Through that preliminary screen, we think that we can eliminate about a quarter of them, which we will be able to recommend for forgiveness without further action. We're going to go through a second review, which is going to get us into more detailed review to look at those cases. It's my hope that we can pare those cases down by about half before we put the remainder in front of a further review process, which I'll describe in a moment. So it's my hope we can get from 1,400 down to about 1,700 before we, just based on our reviewing the paperwork without involving the soldier at all, until half of them, you're off the hook. That's a goal. I don't know what the exact numbers we get to. Turning to the second category, the 15,000, the larger category. In that case, we have greater discretion because we haven't yet established a debt, so we have our enforcement discretion at this point. And so we're going to establish a number of rules of thumb, which were referred to earlier, and these will be my recommendations. It'll be up to the Secretary of the Army to accept those recommendations, but I expect that he's going to have the same objective that I do and the Secretary of Defense does, which is that we want to pare these cases down to the most serious ones. So we're going to screen out cases that are more than 10 years old. That's consistent with your legislation. I expect we're going to screen out cases with some exceptions. We're going to have to be careful about soldiers who've gone AWOL or have other kinds of problems, but we're basically going to try to screen out cases with a debt of $10,000 or less. We're going to screen out cases with we're going to try to screen out most of the cases with enlisted members and lower-ranking members, members without prior service, on the basis that it's unlikely that they would have a basis to know that they were going to be, to read and understand their contract. This was an issue that came up earlier. So as we go through those screens, I think we will get from that second universe of 16,000 or so cases, I expect to reduce that by about 90%, so we get down to about 10% of those, so about something on the order of 2,000, 1,500 to 2,000 cases. We will then put that universe through the kinds of screens, substantive review of that, and I hope to get that down further. It's my hope that by the end of the year, we will have something between 1,000 and 2,000 cases total out of the total universe of 17,000 that are subject to review. Those are the cases that we will then put in front of BCMRs and allow soldiers to come in and make their case that they shouldn't be subject to recoupment. But the objective is to find the easy ones first, get rid of those, tell people we're not pursuing you, so we don't have to tell you you have to come into a BCR or you can come into a BCMR. We're telling you you're off the hook, we're done with you, and do that on the basis of the paper so that we can focus our resources on those cases that are most significant, where we really need to understand the facts better. The Army has already staffed up the BCMRs. They've identified the people who will be serving in this role, so we're going to add resources. They're in the training process. We expect to be up and running by beginning of the year, and the staffing numbers that they've established, we believe are sufficient so that if we have 2,000 cases, we will be able to handle that number of cases by the July 1st deadline that was set by the Secretary. That concludes my testimony, Mr. Chairman, and we'd all be happy to answer any of your questions.
Ms. Starzyk, Ms. McKay, do you have any opening comments? No? Great. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Secretary, for taking time to be here and running us through the process. So one of the questions that I asked General Baldwin, which he deferred to the second panel, was of those 400 who they had recommended being relieved but lost, did not was not granted relief. Do they have another appeal avenue, or is that it? They're done.
So let me say two things. First, I don't necessarily track all of General Baldwin's numbers. Not that his numbers are wrong, but we're trying to develop our own database and go through the numbers on our way. So I can't identify necessarily those 400 cases. What I can say is we will provide an avenue for everybody here. In the cases of those who've already been convicted of fraud, that may be a narrower avenue, but we will provide an avenue for everybody. Okay.
And then my only other question is for those that are in collections, let's say, and are having wages or something garnished by the IRS, or who may have been turned over to a credit agency, whose where's the rose getting pinned to make sure that the IRS stops taking money or that we help get credit ratings restored?
This is a DFAST function, and we believe that's already been taken care of in terms of stopping action. Ms. McKay may want to respond to that in greater detail.
That's correct. When the Secretary asked us to stop the recoupment, we were able to do that within a week for the cases that had been identified to us by the California National Guard. That included the cases that we had internal to DFAS where we were recouping from their military pay, as well as any voluntary repayments that were underway, as well as any cases that we had turned over to the Treasury for recoupment, and that would include the category of private collection agencies. We also took action to rescind any reporting to the credit reporting bureaus, and so for those cases that were identified by the California National Guard to us, those credit ratings have been restored as if these debts never occurred.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
The one thing I'd like to add, Mr. Chairman, is in terms of the 1 week, there are a handful of cases that lagged the 1 week only because we had trouble identifying the individual involved. We had erroneous Social Security numbers and things like that that we've been trying to clean up as we went along.
All right. Thank you. Ms. Davis?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for being here. Of all the changes that have been suggested and some are in the legislation and that you've been working on, is there an area that you've seen by virtue of correspondence from guardsmen or women or others that is still hanging out there, is still an issue that you're not sure that you could tell me confidently that you've resolved?
Congresswoman, I'm confident that we have the authority that we need to clean up this situation. We need to put the resources into it that we're now putting into it, and we will address this, I think, in a way that is fair to everybody. We would, of course, always prefer to see legislation before it goes into law because we can help head off unintended side effects, but we believe that we can work with the legislation that you've enacted and do what we need to do.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else have a concern? Okay. One of the issues, and we had the opportunity to see a number of pieces of correspondence from those who were really affected by this, some from California, not necessarily all. And certainly our offices had several inquiries, and we had casework around this, but minimally, so that there wasn't a sense that this was anything systemic at that particular time. And I think the issue over, whether or not, it was number 6 on a list of issues that the guards were looking at. But we do have a number, quite a bit of correspondence, I think, that you all have received over the course of time that suggests to me that perhaps it wasn't followed through on a number of occasions. And so to what extent do you take another look at some of that correspondence and see what was happening in the lives of the men and women who were writing, why they weren't getting any response whatsoever, whether the hotline or either the assistance center wasn't responding? Why was that?
Honestly, I don't know the answer to that. I've been asked by the Secretary to take a forward look and clean this thing up going forward. I have not been asked to go back and retrace the history of how we got to where we are today. I agree with you that we, and that's why I pointed out that we have an oversight role here. I think that we should have seen this before now, and I don't know why we didn't.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So I guess going forward, because I'm for that as well. I think that's what's really important. We don't want this to happen again. But I am a little concerned that we have these cases, and do you receive inquiries on the part of the men and women for additional assistance, whether it's mental health or financial assistance, whatever that may be? I mean, does there seem to be that a group of individuals who clearly this made a difference in their lives?
So we obviously have all sorts of mechanisms through the Department of Defense for receiving complaints. There were any number of avenues of appeal for these soldiers that are established avenues of appeal. Appeal to DFAS, appeal to the Secretary of the Army, appeal to BCMR. Those are official channels they can go through. In addition, we have obviously abilities to complain to members of Congress, ability to go to hotlines. We have pressure valves for those kinds of things. I can't tell you why those pressure valves didn't raise this case to a higher level before now. I just don't know.
I think what I'm wondering about is going forward, and as this law changes, and we can be grateful that at least in the numbers that we've seen, we're not going to see this kind of occurrence, I hope, again. But we still have all these cases out there that, in fact, perhaps people really could have used some assistance and can still use assistance. How do we deal with that?
So going forward, I think that the Guard the National Guard Bureau really has taken important steps in instituting this automated system, which should automatically pop up places where we have improper payments, and instituting a double check system so you don't have the one person who can sign off on something and get into the kind of problems we had in California there. So while I can't be 100% confident that we're going to avoid any problems, I think we're much more likely to identify these kind of payment errors early. And I think the big problem here was not that we had the payment errors, it's that we made these errors and then let somebody serve out their service, and then came back to them after they served out their service and said, oh, by the way, we made a mistake, we want our money back.
Right.
If we identify that problem in a timely manner, then then at that point, I think it's much more appropriate to recoup than it is when you come back 5 years later and say, I want my money back.
Right. Because I think as we look at the time frame, and even the time frame from 2011 until 16, under the General's command, I think that there are a lot of cases there that people were hurting, and I don't know whether there's also a mechanism within the Guard, there should be, to check up on people, just the same way that we check up on people that are going through transition and then have returned and who do not request the assistance of a mental health provider or any kind of health provider, that there's a sense that we have to check up on them.
I appreciate that. That is part of a commander's responsibility.
Okay, well, and I think going forward, I suspect that the committee is going to want to have another opportunity really to talk about this perhaps in 6 months and see how everybody's doing. Okay, thank you very much.
Chairman, Mr. Levine, and if anybody else wants to answer this, but I am surprised for members of the National Guard that we would go for these, let's just call it deficiencies or whatever you want to call it, that we were going after them civilly and affecting the credit union. Does that affect active duty people as well when there's a mistake on a bonus?
So again, this is a fairly unique case because we were going after people on technical grounds, some people at least on technical grounds, years after this technical mistake was made when they'd already served out. We refer cases for recoupment all the time. As I indicated, there are probably 100,000 cases under recoupment at any given time. We pursue them. There are large cases and small cases. I think that the numbers show that most of them are relatively small cases. I mean, we could have recoupment cases for lost or damaged equipment. We could have recoupment cases because you failed to pay for your travel. We could have recoupment cases because you were getting aviation incentive pay when you weren't a pilot. You know, any number of different kinds of reasons we could have recoupment cases. When the debt is certified by, in this case, the property and financial officer for the National Guard out in California, when the debt is certified, it goes to DFAS, and I believe DFAS would follow the same procedures in each case. So I would defer to Ms. McKay to speak to that.
Yes, you asked specifically about active duty. So as long as when a debt is established on an active duty member, it's handled within the military pay system. Debts are recouped against the payments going to the military members at a predetermined statutory rate. And so it would come out of their active duty pay. As long as an account is not delinquent, and in these cases there'd be active collections against the debt, they're not considered delinquent, there wouldn't be any credit reporting against them.
Mr. Levine, in your testimony, you address the comparative recoupment amounts between California and other states. as $11 million in California alone, and a total of only $2 million between all of the states. I understand that a special audit team was sent to the state of Colorado, Washington, Texas, and the territory of Puerto Rico to check 100% of the records in each of those states and territories. The records check revealed that the automated system's internal controls were not working as intended, resulting in management of the system being brought to the National Guard Bureau level as a short-term solution. Would you describe for us how those systems were not working as intended and what the results of that were in each of those states, particularly perhaps for the state of Colorado?
So I'm unable to answer the question as to the specific internal control deficiencies in the state of Colorado. We did have the AAA and the National Guard Bureau conduct reviews across the states. They did determine that there were internal weaknesses, lack of oversight, lack of multiple sign-off, the kinds of weaknesses that we discovered in California. What we didn't discover was the kind of exploitation of the weaknesses or systematic problems with weaknesses where in California they determined that there was fraud involved. With regard to Colorado, I'm interested by the 100% review because, again, as with Florida, I asked the National Guard Bureau and the AAA to look at whatever cases we had elsewhere, and I've got a rack up of those, which is what the $2 million comes from. I show the same thing for Colorado that I do for Florida, which is no cases of recoupment. So if you have something different on that, on Colorado recoupment, I would be very interested in seeing that. I can't guarantee that I've got 100% accurate information, but I would certainly like to know if there's a significant number of recoupment cases in Colorado, because I don't show any based on the information we've been able to gather at this point.
On the recruiting bonus side, we do.
Okay. If you have information on that, I'd appreciate if you share it with us so we can go back to the National Guard Bureau and the AAA and see where that fell through the cracks.
Actually, I'd like to distinguish between the two. The recruiting bonuses are a different issue than this enlistment bonus issue. So when AAA looked at those questions, it did do an audit of several states. I think it was Missouri, Indiana, Pennsylvania, and a couple others potentially. They did not find systemic problems. They did identify some concerns with internal controls. The National Guard Bureau also had sent audit teams out to different states, and they asked their internal folks to audit. Those came out with some results, but again, there was no finding of the type of systemic problems that they had in California.
Having said that, the numbers that I got from AAA and National Guard Bureau are supposed to cover both of those reviews. So if you have something else, I'd really appreciate seeing it.
Absolutely.
Thank you,
Thank you. Oh, and I just want to, before I yield back, I just want to thank Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much for your service to this committee. It's been a privilege to work with you, despite the fact that you greatly outrank me in terms of being in the military.
Thank you again. The issue of counseling those who now have issues around their credit and the like, is that something that's going to be undertaken by the Guard or by a separate office?
We do financial counseling for members, for service members. Generally, we provide that as a service. My expectation would be it would be done through the National Guard Bureau, but we'd have to check that for you.
All right, because the National Guard indicated to me that they feel that since they're in close proximity to them, that they would like to pursue providing that counseling.
It would be my expectation that in the normal course of events that it would be the California National Guard that would counsel California National Guard soldiers. But again, we'll have to check that for you.
All right. When the general was kind of running through those that were prosecuted and pending cases, most of them from the U.S. Attorney, when he referenced the court-martials, 7 of them, 6 officers, 1 enlisted, I guess, he made the statement that both because of lack of evidence and just the UCMJ itself prevented them from pursuing court-martials of those individuals. What would have to be changed in the UCMJ in order to allow the military justice system to work?
The military justice system has the same presumption of innocence that the civilian justice system does. And so we have the same issues of proof that we have in the civilian justice system. And often there are cases which we might have a suspicion that somebody did something wrong, but when we have prosecutors look at the case, they say there's just not enough here to pursue it to trial. I think that given the way our justice system works, that's to be expected, and I don't think that we're that any of us want to change the fundamental premises of our justice system.
Oh, no, but I just wondered, based on what he said, whether there was something within the UCMJ.
I don't think there's anything unique to the UCMJ that I'd look to. I'd look to the difficulty of prosecuting cases where there's tough evidentiary questions, which we run into in general.
All right. And then I guess finally, I'm still somewhat confused by the fact that this was a California-only problem. And it appears that the National Guard chose to distribute these bonuses in a manner that was inconsistent with other National Guards in an effort to, I guess, get their numbers up, but to somehow offer a recruitment bonus that is given 100% at the beginning of the tour as opposed to in increments seemed quite foolish. Should there be more uniformity among the various National Guards?
So the way I would describe it is that we had a system at that time that was vulnerable to abuse. And that system was vulnerable to abuse not only in California, but in other states too. It was in California that they identified abuse, and that they went after it, pursued it for that reason. It's not that the other states didn't have the same system, it's that they didn't find that same evidence of abuse that led into this 100% audit and review that they did in California.
I see. So, but moving forward, that is not going to be able, that abuse cannot take place?
I can never tell you that we won't have mistakes or problems in the Department of Defense. I think we've addressed this one, but where we'll make a mistake the next time, I can't tell you.
All right. Well, thank you all for your service, and I yield back.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Lynn and Ms. Starzyk and Ms. McKay for being here. I know it's a very difficult issue, but one we want to make sure we get our hands around to ensure that we take care of the Guardsmen and women in California and make sure that we don't have any similar issues across the defense enterprise. So we appreciate you being here. Before we adjourn, I just want to take a moment of personal privilege, as this is my last subcommittee hearing, and thank my ranking member, Ms. Davis, for all of her help over the last 2 years. You know, when we set out an agenda for this Congress, what we were going to accomplish in this subcommittee, we had quite a few major issues, and people said we were crazy for thinking we could get even one of them done, whether that be UCMJ reform, retirement reform, health care reform, commissary reform, and due to your support, the hard work of all of the committee members and the incredible staff, we got all 4 of them done. And that would not have happened had it not been for the great working relationship that we all have. I also, although he's not here, want to thank the Sergeant Major, Mr. Waltz. We know, but standing beside every officer as an NCO, making sure he gets the job done right, and Mr. Waltz was that person for me. And I really want to thank the staff, everybody who made the last 2 years as successful as it has been. It's been a great honor to serve, and it shows this committee's commitment to taking care of our men and women in uniform, their families, our retirees, and our survivors. There being no further business, the hearing is adjourned.